I learned something important the day I accidentally touched an alien queen. Sometimes the smallest mistake in the galaxy can change everything. The ladder beneath my boots hummed softly as I tightened the last bolt on the climate regulator above the throne chamber, the metal warm from the steady heat circulating through the palace walls. My name is Ethan Carter, maintenance engineer, contract worker, and the only human crazy enough to take a repair job inside the Varelian Royal Complex. The pay was good, the hours were worse, and the client happened to rule 17-star systems. I wiped the smear of lubricant from my hands and started climbing down, careful with each rung, because the ladder stood nearly 12 feet above the polished crystal floor. The air smelled faintly metallic, mixed with the strange floral scent that always seemed to drift through this place, a perfume produced by the palace's living architecture. Every step echoed in the cavernous chamber until the sound of approaching footsteps joined the rhythm. I glanced down just in time to see her entering the hall. Queen Serelith didn't simply walk into a room. The room seemed to adjust itself around her presence. She stood easily 8 feet tall, her iridescent blue skin reflecting the pale glow of the ceiling panels like ripples of water under moonlight. A thin silver mantle rested across her shoulders, and the soft chime of ceremonial ornaments followed her movements. Behind her, rows of royal guards stood perfectly still, armor gleaming, eyes fixed forward. I told myself not to stare. Humans weren't exactly common visitors here, and the last thing I wanted was to make the ruler of an interstellar empire uncomfortable. I stepped off the ladder, boots landing on the smooth floor with a quiet thud. That's when gravity betrayed me. The ladder shifted slightly, my balance tilted, and my hand shot out instinctively to steady myself. My fingers brushed against something warm and smooth before I could stop them. The contact lasted less than a second, a quick accidental touch against the side of the queen's hip as she passed. The chamber went silent. Every sound died at once, like the air itself had decided to hold its breath. When I looked up, 20 Varelian guards had already turned in perfect unison. Their tall silhouettes surrounded the throne platform, each helmet angled toward me. No one moved, but the tension in the room felt heavier than gravity on a high-mass planet. I swallowed. My brain quickly remembered a cultural briefing I'd skimmed weeks earlier. Varelians considered physical contact with royalty deeply personal. Not a crime exactly, but definitely not something a repair tech from Earth should do by accident. Slowly, the queen stopped walking. For a moment, she simply stood there, towering above me, her golden eyes studying my face with the calm curiosity of someone examining an unfamiliar machine. I raised both hands in surrender, palms open. "Sorry, Your Majesty," I said quietly, forcing a nervous smile. That was gravity, not bravery. Another second passed. Then something unexpected happened. The queen's expression softened. A faint smile curved across her luminous features, subtle but unmistakable. She leaned slightly closer, her voice low and melodic when she spoke. "Human," she said gently, "do that again." I stared at the queen, convinced that I had misunderstood her words, because rulers of star empires usually did not ask maintenance engineers to repeat accidental mistakes. The silence inside the throne chamber stretched for several seconds, long enough for my heartbeat to echo loudly in my ears. The guards remained frozen in formation, their armor reflecting pale bands of light across the polished floor, waiting for some signal from their monarch. Queen Serelith did not move away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, golden eyes studying me with the calm curiosity of someone examining a puzzle that had suddenly become interesting. Up close, she was even more striking than she had appeared from the ladder, her iridescent skin shimmering like blue glass under soft light, every movement graceful and controlled. I cleared my throat quietly and lowered my hands a little, still unsure whether this was a test, a misunderstanding, or the strangest moment of my entire life. "Your Majesty," I said carefully, choosing each word like I was stepping across thin ice. I should clarify that what just happened was completely accidental. The queen's faint smile remained. "Accidents are often the beginning of discovery," she replied in a voice smooth as flowing water. Her words carried easily across the chamber even though she spoke softly. The guards exchanged brief glances but did not interrupt. I hesitated, aware that every eye in the room was locked onto me. The cultural briefing I had received before arriving on Varelia echoed in my memory. There, species valued distance and formality. Physical contact, especially with royalty, almost never happened outside of ceremonial tradition. Yet the queen herself had just asked me to repeat it. My hand hovered awkwardly near my side, while my brain tried to process the situation. Human Ethan Carter, the queen said after a moment, speaking my name with surprising accuracy. You repair the environmental systems of this palace, correct? Yes, Your Majesty, I answered. Climate regulation and structural maintenance. She took a small step closer. The movement was subtle, but it shortened the distance between us enough that I could feel a gentle warmth radiating from her skin, slightly warmer than a human body temperature. My instincts told me to step back. Instead, I stayed still. The queen looked down at my hand briefly, then back at my face. You stabilized yourself by touching me, she said thoughtfully. Your reaction was instinctive. Natural. I nodded slowly. That tends to happen when ladders move unexpectedly. A faint sound rippled through the chamber. It took me a second to realize that several of the guards had quietly exhaled in relief at the normal tone of the conversation. The queen's eyes brightened slightly. Then we will repeat the circumstances, she said. In the interest of understanding. I blinked. Understanding what exactly? Your species, she answered calmly. And why your touch produced a reaction within my nervous system that my scientists have never recorded before. My confusion must have been obvious because the queen raised one elegant hand, signaling the guards to remain at ease. You need not fear, Ethan Carter, she continued. You are not in trouble. I looked around the enormous chamber, at the towering alien guards and the ruler of an interstellar empire standing 2 feet away from me, and then back at my own hand like it had suddenly become a scientific instrument. That is good to hear, I said slowly. The queen extended her arm slightly, inviting but not commanding. Now, she said gently, curiosity shining in her golden eyes. Let us see if the phenomenon repeats. My hand hovered in the air for a moment while my brain tried to process the situation, because standing in front of an 8-foot-tall alien queen who had just invited me to repeat an accidental touch was not something any engineering manual had ever prepared me for. The throne chamber remained quiet. The enormous curved ceiling reflecting soft white light across the crystal floor, and every royal guard still watched without moving. Queen Seralith waited patiently, her posture relaxed but attentive, as if the outcome of this tiny experiment genuinely mattered to her. I took a slow breath and reminded myself that she had just said I was not in trouble. All right, I said carefully, keeping my voice calm. For scientific curiosity. The queen gave a small approving nod. Her arm remained slightly extended, not demanding, simply offering the same distance that had existed a few seconds earlier. I stepped closer, closing the last foot between us. Standing this near to her felt strange. Humans were used to looking down at most people in a room, but Seralith towered above me with effortless presence. The faint floral scent from the palace walls mixed with a warmer tone that seemed to come from her skin itself, something natural and unfamiliar. Slowly, cautiously, I lifted my hand and placed it lightly against the side of her hip again, exactly where gravity had pushed it before. The contact lasted less than 2 seconds. Warmth spread through my palm, steady and surprisingly comfortable, like touching a surface that had been sitting in sunlight. I pulled my hand back immediately, not wanting to overstep whatever invisible cultural boundary might still exist. The queen inhaled quietly. It was subtle, but I noticed it because everything else in the room had gone perfectly still again. Her eyes closed for a brief moment, as if she were concentrating on a sensation only she could feel. Then she opened them again, and the expression in those golden eyes had changed. It was no longer simple curiosity. Now there was something deeper there, something thoughtful. Interesting, she said softly. One of the guards shifted slightly behind her, clearly confused by the entire exchange, but unwilling to interrupt. I rubbed the back of my neck awkwardly. Your Majesty, if I may ask, what exactly are we testing? Seralith looked down at my hand again, then back to my face. Your species emits a subtle biochemical signal through the skin, she explained. My body recognized it immediately. I blinked. You mean like body heat? More complex than heat, she replied. My nervous system reacted the moment contact occurred. The queen slowly turned her wrist and touched the center of her own chest. just below the collar of her silver mantle. For a moment, she continued thoughtfully. A constant background pressure that has existed in my mind for many years simply disappeared. I frowned slightly, trying to follow the logic. So you were saying my clumsy ladder accident did something helpful? Yes, she said calmly. That appears to be the case. I let out a quiet breath of disbelief. Across the vast chamber, the royal guards were now watching with a completely different kind of attention. Not suspicion, curiosity. The queen studied my face for another moment before speaking again. Ethan Carter, she said gently, how long is your maintenance contract with this palace? I shrugged. 6 weeks. Maybe 8 if the climate system keeps misbehaving. The queen's faint smile returned, but this time there was clear intention behind it. Then you will remain here, she said, close to the throne chamber. I raised an eyebrow. For additional repairs? Saralith shook her head slightly, golden eyes glowing with quiet interest. For additional experiments. The throne chamber did not return to normal after that conversation because nothing about the situation felt normal anymore. The royal guards slowly relaxed their posture, but their attention never drifted far from me. The lone human maintenance engineer, standing a few feet from the ruler of a star-spanning empire. Queen Saralith turned away from the center of the chamber and began walking toward the elevated platform where her throne stood, her long silver mantle moving like quiet water behind her. For a moment, I assumed the conversation had ended and that I would be escorted politely back to the maintenance corridor where people like me usually stayed. Instead, the queen paused halfway to the throne and glanced back over her shoulder. Ethan Carter, she said calmly, her voice carrying easily across the enormous hall. Walk with me. I hesitated for half a second because the request felt unusual. Engineers did not usually take casual walks with alien monarchs. Still, refusing seemed like a very poor career decision. I stepped forward and followed her toward the platform. Up close, the architecture of the throne chamber revealed details that most visitors never noticed. The floor beneath our feet was not stone, but living crystal, faint veins of pale blue light drifting slowly through it like currents under ice. The air temperature remained perfectly balanced around 72 degrees Fahrenheit thanks to the environmental systems I had spent the entire morning repairing. For the first time I realized the queen had probably been aware of my work long before today. Saralith reached the base of the throne platform and rested one hand lightly on the curved railing. Her golden eyes focused on the distant ceiling for a moment before she spoke again. For many years, she said thoughtfully, a constant signal has existed inside my nervous system. Not pain exactly. Something closer to pressure. Always present. Always distracting. I leaned slightly against the railing beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. Like a persistent background noise, I suggested. The queen nodded once. Yes, my physicians have studied it for decades. She turned toward me again, curiosity returning to her expression. But the moment you touched me, the signal vanished. I folded my arms slowly, trying to picture the situation from a technical angle. Human skin produces a lot of small chemical signals, I said. Most of them are harmless. Saralith studied my face as if measuring my reaction. Harmless to humans perhaps, she replied quietly. To my species it may be something entirely different. Behind us the massive chamber doors opened softly, and several Varelian scientists entered, their long white research mantles brushing the polished floor as they approached. I recognized the leader immediately. Dr. Terrelin, the chief royal biologist, a tall violet-skinned scholar who looked permanently fascinated by anything unusual. His eyes widened the moment he saw me standing next to the queen. Your Majesty, he said respectfully, you requested our presence. Saralith gestured calmly toward me. Doctor, the human Ethan Carter will remain inside the palace for the duration of his contract. The scientist blinked. Remain inside the palace. Yes, the queen said with quiet certainty. His presence may represent a biological discovery of great importance. I rubbed the back of my neck, suddenly aware that my simple repair job had taken a very strange turn. Dr. Terrelin adjusted the small data tablet in his hands and looked at me like a rare mineral sample someone had just dropped into his laboratory. Fascinating, he murmured. The queen looked back toward me once more, that same thoughtful smile returning to her luminous features. Ethan Carter, she said gently, your maintenance work will continue tomorrow. I nodded. Understood. Saralith tilted her head slightly. But tonight, she added with quiet curiosity, we begin learning why the touch of a human can silence the mind of a queen. The palace did not sleep the way human buildings did. Long after the throne chamber had emptied and the last royal attendants had drifted quietly down the luminous corridors, the structure itself remained awake. Soft currents of pale blue light moved slowly through the living crystal walls, and the distant hum of environmental systems echoed gently through the vaulted ceilings. I stood near the central balcony overlooking the lower gardens, holding a cup of warm mineral water that one of the palace attendants had insisted would help my body adjust to the slightly different atmospheric mix inside the Varelian complex. It tasted faintly like spring water back on Earth, just colder. A few hours earlier, I had been fixing a climate regulator 12 feet above the throne chamber floor. Now I was apparently the center of a royal biological study. I shook my head slowly and took another sip. Footsteps approached from behind me, quiet but unmistakable. The sound was lighter than the armored guards who had escorted me earlier. When I turned, Queen Saralith was walking toward the balcony alone. Without the towering presence of her guard formation, the moment felt strangely calm. The soft white lighting from the corridor reflected gently across her iridescent blue skin, making the subtle patterns beneath it shimmer like distant water under moonlight. She stopped beside the balcony railing and looked out over the gardens below where tall silver plants swayed slowly in the controlled night breeze. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she glanced at the cup in my hand. Is the mineral water acceptable to human physiology? She asked calmly. I nodded. It tastes a lot like mountain water in Colorado, I said. Just colder. The queen seemed pleased by the comparison. Good, she replied quietly. I was informed that humans require careful environmental adaptation when visiting other worlds. I leaned lightly against the railing, studying the glowing garden paths below. Usually it is the other way around, I said. Humans are the ones adapting. Saralith turned slightly toward me, curiosity returning to her expression. Yet your species appears remarkably comfortable in unfamiliar environments, she observed. I shrugged. Engineers get used to strange places. The queen was silent for a moment, as if considering that answer. Then she lifted one hand and rested it gently against the smooth balcony railing between us. Dr. Terrelin believes your skin may produce a molecular signal that interacts with my neural receptors, she said thoughtfully. But I suspect the explanation is more complex than that. I raised an eyebrow. Why do you think that? Saralith looked down at her own hand for a moment before answering. Because the signal returned when you left the throne chamber, she said softly. Immediately. I straightened slightly, meaning the pressure you described earlier. She nodded. Yes. The queen turned fully toward me now, the soft garden light reflecting in her golden eyes, which suggests the effect is temporary. I studied her expression for a moment. Even with all the power she carried, there was something undeniably human in that quiet curiosity. I set the cup down on the railing beside me. Then we should test that theory again, I said carefully. Saralith did not answer right away. Instead, she watched my hand the same way a scientist watches a delicate instrument before beginning an experiment. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but thoughtful. Yes, the queen said. I believe we should. The night air drifting through the palace garden carried a faint coolness, the kind that reminded me of early mornings in the Rocky Mountains. Except here the stars above were not the same ones I had grown up with. Queen Saralith remained beside the balcony railing, her tall silhouette framed by the soft glow of the garden lights below. For a long moment neither of us moved, both aware that the strange experiment we had begun earlier in the throne chamber was about to continue in a much quieter place. The palace around us hummed gently with life, a steady background vibration from the environmental systems and living crystal structures that formed the heart of Varelian architecture. I had spent the entire afternoon repairing those systems, tightening regulators and recalibrating thermal nodes, never imagining that the most interesting problem inside the building would turn out to be biological instead of mechanical. Saralith looked down at the railing again, her fingers resting lightly against the smooth surface as if she could feel the faint currents of energy moving through the palace walls. The pressure has returned, she said quietly. Her voice carried the same calm tone as before, but I could hear the difference now that I understood what she meant. The constant signal she had described earlier was back. I nodded slowly and stepped a little closer, so we stood within arm's reach again. Up close, the warmth of her presence was easy to notice, slightly above normal human body temperature, radiating gently through the cool night air. I lifted my hand slowly, giving her time to change her mind if she wanted to end the experiment. She did not move away. Instead, her golden eyes followed my hand with careful attention, the way a scientist watches the moment a switch is about to be flipped on a new machine. My fingers touched the same place as before, light and steady, the contact simple and respectful. Warmth spread across my palm again, not intense but constant, like resting a hand near a quiet heat source on a cold night. For 2 seconds we remained like that. Then the Queen exhaled slowly. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly, the tension that had been hiding in her posture fading away the same way it had earlier inside the throne chamber. When I pulled my hand back, she opened her eyes again and studied the balcony floor as if confirming something important. The signal vanished immediately, she said softly. I leaned against the railing beside her again, letting out a quiet breath of my own. Well, I said, that confirms the temporary effect. Sarilith turned toward me with a thoughtful expression. Yes, she replied, but it raises a larger question. I glanced at her curiously. Which is? The Queen's faint smile returned, calm but purposeful. Why does your species possess a biological influence my people have never encountered before? I laughed quietly under my breath. Trust me, Your Majesty, humans ask that question about ourselves all the time. For the first time that evening, the Queen laughed softly as well, the sound surprisingly warm against the quiet backdrop of the alien garden. Then she looked at me again with the same curiosity that had started this entire chain of events. Dr. Terrelin will want to begin formal studies tomorrow, she said. I nodded. I figured as much. Sarilith rested one hand against the railing again and looked out across the glowing paths below. But before the scientists arrive, she added calmly, I would like to understand something myself. I tilted my head slightly. What is that? The Queen glanced back toward my hand, her golden eyes reflecting the soft light of the palace. Whether the effect becomes stronger, she said thoughtfully, if the contact lasts longer than 2 seconds. The balcony garden remained quiet except for the gentle movement of silver leaves below and the distant hum of the palace systems that kept the enormous structure alive through the night. Queen Sarilith stood beside me with calm patience, her tall figure outlined by the soft glow rising from the garden paths. Her golden eyes had shifted from the distant stars back to my hand again, the same thoughtful focus returning to her expression. A moment earlier she had asked whether the effect might become stronger if the contact lasted longer than 2 seconds. That question hung quietly between us like the beginning of another experiment neither of us had planned for earlier that day. I rubbed my palm lightly against the railing, thinking through the situation the way an engineer studies an unfamiliar machine. All right, I said slowly, choosing my words with care. But if we are testing duration, we should probably approach this like an actual experiment. The Queen tilted her head slightly. Explain. I gestured toward the railing where the faint blue currents of light moved beneath the crystal surface. First, we establish a baseline. You already confirmed the pressure signal is present again. Then we repeat the contact and measure how long it takes for the signal to disappear. Sarilith listened with calm interest. Logical, she replied. Your species approaches uncertainty with structure. I gave a small shrug. It is the only way engineers stay employed. The Queen's faint smile returned, and for a moment the tension of the strange situation faded into something that felt almost normal. Then she turned slightly, so we were facing each other more directly. The balcony lighting cast soft reflections across her iridescent blue skin, making the subtle patterns beneath it shimmer like moving water. I am ready, she said. I lifted my hand again, slower this time, giving her plenty of space to stop the experiment if she wished. She did not step back. Instead, her shoulders relaxed slightly, as if she had already decided the outcome would be safe. My fingers rested lightly against the same place along her side, steady and careful. The warmth was immediate again, the same gentle heat spreading across my palm. But this time I kept my hand in place. 1 second passed. 2 seconds. 3. I watched her expression closely. At first nothing changed except a subtle shift in her breathing. Then her eyes closed briefly as if the constant background pressure she had described earlier had simply switched off again. The moment lasted longer than before, quiet and still beneath the alien stars. When she finally opened her eyes again, the thoughtful calm had deepened into something closer to relief. "It disappears faster when the contact continues," she said softly. I nodded, keeping my voice low so the quiet moment remained undisturbed. "Then that means your nervous system is responding immediately." After another second, I gently removed my hand. The Queen remained still for a moment, as if confirming that the signal had returned once more after the contact ended. Finally, she exhaled slowly and looked back toward the glowing garden paths below. "Fascinating," she murmured. I leaned back against the railing beside her again, letting my arms rest comfortably while I studied the strange alien plants moving in the night breeze. "You realize this is probably going to make your scientists very excited tomorrow," I said. Saralith glanced at me with a quiet smile. "Yes," she replied. Then her eyes shifted once more to my hand, curiosity still glowing there beneath the calm surface. "But tonight," the Queen added gently, "I believe we may have discovered something even more interesting." The quiet balcony overlooking the glowing gardens felt different now, as if the palace itself had noticed the strange discovery unfolding between an alien queen and a human engineer. Queen Saralith remained beside the railing with a thoughtful stillness, her posture relaxed in a way that had not been present earlier in the evening. The faint tension she had described before seemed to vanish every time my hand made contact, and each repetition of the experiment confirmed the same pattern. I watched the slow movement of the silver plants below while the distant stars of this unfamiliar system shimmered across the night sky. Eventually the Queen spoke again, her voice calm, but carrying a new depth of curiosity. "The effect does not diminish," she said quietly. "Each time the signal disappears with the same consistency." I nodded slightly, thinking through the data the way I would examine readings from a malfunctioning environmental system. "That means it is not random," I said. "Your nervous system is responding to something specific." Saralith turned toward me again, golden eyes reflecting the faint blue currents running through the living crystal walls of the palace. "Dr. Terrelin will say the same thing tomorrow," she replied. "But he will focus only on chemical interactions." I raised an eyebrow. "You think there is more to it?" The Queen considered the question for a moment before answering. "Perhaps," she said slowly. "Your species often behaves differently than predicted by simple biological models." I laughed quietly under my breath. "You are not wrong about that." For a moment the conversation drifted into comfortable silence again. The balcony overlooked several acres of carefully maintained alien gardens, and from this height the glowing pathways formed patterns that reminded me of circuit diagrams on a motherboard. Eventually Saralith rested both hands lightly on the railing and looked out across the landscape again. "When the pressure disappears," she said thoughtfully, "my thoughts become clearer." I leaned slightly closer, so I could hear her better over the soft wind moving through the silver leaves. "Clearer how?" The Queen paused, choosing her words carefully. "Imagine listening to a quiet conversation while a machine hums constantly in the background," she explained. "When the hum stops, every word suddenly becomes easier to understand." I nodded slowly. "Then your mind has been working under constant interference." Saralith glanced back toward my hand again, the same analytical curiosity returning to her expression. "Until today," she said. I studied the balcony floor for a moment, thinking about the strange chain of events that had started with a loose ladder and a maintenance job that should have been routine. Finally, I straightened and rested my forearms on the railing beside her. "You realize this could change a lot of things for your people," I said carefully. The Queen did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked out toward the distant horizon where the alien stars burned steadily above the palace towers. After several seconds, she spoke again. "Yes," she said softly. Then she turned toward me with that faint, thoughtful smile I was beginning to recognize. "But first we must understand why a human engineer accidentally solved a problem that my entire empire has been studying for years." The balcony remained quiet after my last words, the glowing garden paths below reflecting softly across the living crystal walls of the palace. Queen Saralith did not answer immediately. Instead, she stood beside the railing with a calm stillness that made it clear she was thinking several steps ahead. the way a leader does when every decision carries consequences far beyond a single moment. I rested my hands lightly against the smooth crystal surface, watching the slow movement of silver leaves in the garden breeze while the distant stars of this system burned steadily above us. Finally, the queen spoke again, her voice thoughtful but steady. My people have studied this signal for nearly 20 years, she said. Our physicians believed it was an unavoidable condition of our neural structure. I glanced toward her with quiet curiosity. And now it disappears when a human touches you. Sarilith nodded once. Yes. The word carried more weight than its simplicity suggested. I leaned back against the railing and looked up toward the unfamiliar constellations stretching across the alien sky. You know what the strange part is? I said slowly. Humans do not usually think of ourselves as biologically special. The queen tilted her head slightly. Your species expands rapidly across the stars, she replied. From our perspective, that appears quite remarkable. I gave a quiet laugh. That is mostly stubborn curiosity and a willingness to try things that smarter species might avoid. Sarilith considered that answer for a moment before her faint smile returned. Then perhaps stubborn curiosity is the key, she said. The soft wind drifting across the balcony carried the cool scent of the alien gardens below, and for a moment the conversation felt less like a royal discussion and more like two people quietly studying an interesting puzzle. Eventually the queen turned slightly, so she was facing me again. Dr. Terrelin will begin controlled studies tomorrow morning, she said. He will measure chemical signals, neural responses, and every other variable he can observe. I nodded slowly. That is what scientists do. Sarilith studied my expression carefully. But I believe there is something else worth examining tonight. I raised an eyebrow. What is that? Her golden eyes shifted briefly to my hand resting against the railing. Your species interacts with the world through instinct as much as analysis, she said thoughtfully. Earlier you described your touch as a reflex caused by gravity. I nodded. That is correct. The queen rested one hand lightly against the railing between us again. Then perhaps the origin of this effect lies in something equally simple, she said. I looked at her curiously. Such as? Sarilith's voice remained calm, but the curiosity in her expression had clearly deepened. Trust, she replied softly. I frowned slightly, not sure I had heard correctly. Trust. She nodded. When you touched me the first time, you believed you were about to fall. The queen looked out over the glowing garden again before finishing her thought. Your mind acted without fear of harming me because you believed the contact would only stabilize you. I studied her face for a moment, realizing where the logic was leading. You think the effect might depend on intention. Sarilith met my eyes again with quiet certainty. Yes, she said. Then the queen looked down toward my hand once more, the same thoughtful curiosity returning to her golden gaze. Which means our next experiment may require something more than simple contact. The quiet garden balcony seemed even stiller after the queen spoke the word trust. For a moment, I simply watched the glowing pathways below while my mind turned the idea over the way an engineer studies an unexpected reading on a control panel. Queen Sarilith stood beside me with calm patience, her golden eyes reflecting faint strands of blue light drifting through the living crystal walls of the palace. The night air moved gently across the balcony, cool and steady, carrying the soft scent of the silver plants growing several stories below us. Finally, I looked back toward her. You think intention matters, I said slowly. The queen nodded once. Yes. I leaned my forearms against the railing again, considering the logic behind her theory. All right, I replied. Then we need to change the conditions of the test. Sarilith tilted her head slightly, interested. Explain. I turned toward her fully now, so we were facing each other in the soft glow of the balcony lights. Earlier the contact happened by accident, I said. Then we repeated it carefully, like scientists. The queen listened quietly. But if your theory is correct, I continued, the next step would be contact with clear intention. The faintest smile returned to her luminous features. Precisely. The palace remained silent around us, the enormous complex resting in its controlled night cycle while the alien stars stretched endlessly above the towers. For a moment neither of us moved. Then Sarilith stepped a little closer, closing the distance between us until we stood only a foot apart. Even after several hours, it was still strange to stand face to face with someone nearly 2 feet taller than me. Yet the Queen's presence no longer felt intimidating. If anything, it felt calm, focused, almost collaborative. "Then let us remove uncertainty," she said gently. Her hand moved from the railing and hovered in the space between us. "Earlier you touched me." Her voice remained steady. "This time I will begin the contact." I raised my eyebrows slightly, surprised but not opposed to the idea. "Fair enough," I said quietly. The Queen lifted her hand and rested it lightly against my forearm. The contact was simple, almost casual, but the effect was immediate. I saw the change in her expression before she even spoke. The subtle tension behind her eyes disappeared again the moment our skin made contact, just as it had every other time that evening. Saralith closed her eyes briefly, breathing in slowly as if enjoying the sudden clarity returning to her thoughts. After a few seconds, she opened them again and looked directly at me. "The signal vanished again," she said softly. I nodded, studying the moment carefully. "But this time the contact came from you," I said. The Queen glanced down at where her hand rested on my arm, thoughtful curiosity shining in her golden eyes. "Which means your presence alone is not the variable," she said. I leaned back slightly against the railing again, realizing the implications of what we had just confirmed. "Then the effect works both ways." Saralith's faint smile grew just a little brighter. "Yes," she said quietly. Then she looked back up toward the alien stars for a moment before adding one more thought. "Which means tomorrow's scientific study may reveal something far more important than either of us expected." The contact lasted only a few seconds before Queen Saralith slowly withdrew her hand from my arm. Yet the quiet clarity that had crossed her expression remained for a moment longer. The night wind moved gently through the balcony garden again, stirring the silver leaves below and carrying faint reflections of blue light across the crystal walls of the palace. I watched the Queen carefully as she looked out toward the distant horizon, the alien stars stretching above the towers like unfamiliar constellations drawn across dark glass. Eventually she spoke again, her voice calm but thoughtful. "For 2 decades my physicians believed the signal inside my nervous system was permanent," she said quietly. "They told me it was part of my species." I rested my elbows against the railing, listening. "And now it disappears when a human touches you," I said. Saralith nodded slightly. "Yes." The single word carried a strange mixture of relief and curiosity. I looked down at my hands for a moment, still trying to wrap my mind around the idea that something as ordinary as human skin contact could produce a neurological effect in a completely different species. Finally, I glanced back toward her. "You realize the scientific teams are going to run hundreds of tests tomorrow," I said. "Chemical scans, neural imaging, atmospheric variables." The Queen's faint smile returned. Dr. Terrelin already requested 3 research divisions to prepare their equipment. I laughed quietly under my breath. That sounds about right. The balcony remained peaceful, but the palace beyond us had begun shifting slowly toward the early morning cycle. Subtle changes in the lighting inside the crystal corridors signaled that the artificial sunrise would begin within an hour. Saralith noticed the shift as well. She turned away from the garden and looked back toward the towering palace halls behind us. "When the scientists arrive, they will treat this phenomenon as a technical puzzle," she said thoughtfully. I nodded. That is how science works. The Queen's golden eyes drifted back toward my hand again. "But tonight we learned something that data alone might not reveal." I raised an eyebrow slightly. "Which is?" Saralith rested her hand lightly against the railing once more, her expression calm but certain. "The effect appears strongest when neither of us expects it," she said. I thought back to the first moment in the throne chamber when gravity had forced me to reach out without thinking. "An accidental reflex," I said slowly. "Yes." The Queen turned to face me again, curiosity glowing quietly in her eyes. "Which suggests something important about your species." I crossed my arms thoughtfully. "What is that?" Saralith's answer came without hesitation. "Humans act first to stabilize the world around them," she said. "Only afterward do they analyze the situation." I smiled slightly. "That is a polite way of saying we improvise." The Queen returned the smile with calm amusement. "Perhaps," she replied. Then she glanced toward the brightening palace corridors where the first faint tones of artificial dawn were beginning to spread through the crystal architecture. When she looked back at me again, Her expression carried a quiet certainty that had not been there earlier in the evening. "Ethan Carter," she said gently, "I believe tomorrow will confirm something remarkable." I tilted my head slightly. "What kind of remarkable?" The Queen's golden eyes reflected the first pale light of morning as she answered, "That your species may possess a biological trait my empire never knew it needed." The first light of the palace morning spread slowly through the crystal corridors, soft bands of pale gold reflecting across the balcony walls and turning the glowing gardens below into a landscape of shimmering color. Queen Seralith remained beside the railing, watching the horizon with quiet focus as the artificial dawn of the Varelian palace completed its cycle. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The strange chain of events that had begun with a loose ladder and an accidental touch now felt far larger than a simple biological curiosity. I rested my hands lightly against the railing, feeling the faint warmth of the living crystal beneath my palms while the palace systems shifted from night mode to day operations. Somewhere deeper inside the enormous structure, the distant movement of attendants and research teams had already begun. Dr. Terrelin and his scientists would arrive soon. Seralith finally turned back toward me, the golden glow of the rising palace light reflecting softly across her iridescent blue skin. "In less than 1 hour the research divisions will begin their analysis," she said calmly. I nodded. "Blood chemistry, neural scans, environmental controls," I said. "Your scientists will examine every variable they can measure." The Queen's expression remained thoughtful. "Yes," she replied. "They will search for molecules, hormones, and electrical impulses." I folded my arms lightly across my chest, considering everything we had observed through the night. "And if they confirm the effect is real," I said slowly, "your empire will suddenly become very interested in human biology." Seralith studied my face for a moment before answering. "Not only biology," she said quietly. "Culture as well." I raised an eyebrow. "Culture?" She nodded once. "You described your species as curious and adaptable," she said. "Those traits may be connected to what we have observed tonight." The thought hung in the air. Between us, while the palace lighting brightened another degree, the soft golden tones spreading through the balcony garden. I glanced out across the distant towers of the complex, realizing just how large the Varelian capital truly was. Millions of people lived within this city alone. If the Queen's mysterious neural signal existed across her entire species, the implications were enormous. "Your people might need humans around more often," I said quietly. Seralith considered that possibility without any sign of surprise. "Perhaps," she replied. "Or perhaps the solution will teach us something deeper about how our species interact." I looked back toward her with curiosity. "Meaning?" The Queen rested her hand lightly against the railing again, her gaze thoughtful but calm. "Your presence removes a signal that has burdened my mind for many years," she said. "But the effect only occurs through simple contact." I nodded slowly. "Which means the solution might not be technology." Seralith's faint smile returned. "Exactly." For a moment the two of us simply stood there while the palace continued to wake around us. Finally the Queen looked toward the corridor entrance behind us where the first distant voices of approaching researchers were beginning to echo through the halls. When she turned back to me again her expression carried quiet certainty. "Ethan Carter," she said gently, "when the scientists arrive they will search for complicated answers." I tilted my head slightly. "And you think the answer might be simple?" The Queen nodded once, golden eyes steady. "Yes." Then she glanced briefly toward my hand again, the same calm curiosity returning that had started this entire discovery. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the most powerful solutions are the ones a species never thought to test." The morning light inside the palace continued to brighten, flowing through the living crystal walls like sunrise through clear water. From the corridor behind us, the quiet footsteps of approaching researchers echoed softly, signaling that the calm night of discovery was about to transform into a day of careful scientific observation. Queen Seralith remained beside the balcony railing for a moment longer before turning toward the sound. Her posture had changed slightly since the beginning of the night. The faint tension she had described for years was absent now, replaced by a quiet clarity that seemed to sharpen every movement she made. I rested my hands against the railing and watched the palace gardens. Below, thinking about how strange it was that a routine maintenance call had somehow become part of something much larger. Eventually, the Queen spoke again, her voice calm and steady as always. "Dr. Terrelin will arrive within minutes," she said. I nodded slowly. "And once the scientists start asking questions, this balcony experiment will turn into a full research project." Saralitha's faint smile returned. "Yes." She glanced briefly toward my hands again, the same thoughtful curiosity still present in her golden eyes. "But before that begins, I believe we have already learned the most important lesson." I tilted my head slightly. "Which is?" The Queen looked out across the glowing gardens one last time before answering. "For many years my people searched for a technological solution to a biological problem," she said quietly. Yet the answer appeared through something far simpler. I followed her gaze across the alien landscape, the towering silver plants moving gently in the morning breeze. "A human engineer losing his balance on a ladder," I said. Saralith let out a soft laugh, warm and genuine. "Yes." The sound echoed faintly across the balcony before fading into the quiet morning air. The palace doors behind us opened again, and this time several figures stepped onto the balcony. Dr. Terrelin and two members of his research team paused a respectful distance away, their data tablets already glowing with prepared instruments and analysis tools. The scientist bowed slightly toward the Queen. "Your Majesty," he said, "the research divisions are ready." Saralith nodded calmly, but did not move immediately. Instead, she turned back toward me one last time. The first full light of the palace morning reflected across her iridescent skin, making the subtle patterns beneath it shimmer like waves beneath sunlight. "Ethan Carter," she said gently. I straightened slightly. "Yes, Your Majesty." The Queen studied me for a moment, as if committing the memory of the entire night to mind. Then she extended her hand toward me once more. The gesture was simple and unceremonious, nothing like the formal rituals of royal protocol. I understood the meaning immediately. I placed my hand lightly against hers. The effect was the same as every other time that night. The quiet clarity returned to her expression, steady and unmistakable. Dr. Terrelin watched the moment with visible fascination while his instruments recorded the data. Saralith smiled softly before releasing the contact. Then she turned toward her scientists, her voice calm but certain. "Doctor," she said, "it appears the solution to our greatest neurological mystery has finally arrived." She paused briefly before adding one final thought. "And it came from a species that simply wanted to keep its balance."